professors, and my dear friends. I'm Maitrayee Chakraborty, one of the enrolled students of the PGDGC course provided by Superego College of Education, and today I'm going to present the theory of unconscious by Dr. Sigmund Freud. Before we move on to Freud's theories, it is important for us to know a little bit about Freud as a person. Sigmund Freud was an Austrian neurologist and the founder of psychoanalysis, which is a clinical method for evaluating and treating pathologies of the psyche through dialogue between the patient and the psychoanalyst. He was born on the 6th of May 1856 to Jewish parents of the Moravian town of Freiburg in Austria. He qualified as a doctor of medicine in 1881 at the University of Vienna. His knowledge of psychoanalysis was based on the theory of the unconscious, in which he went on to develop a psychic structure that comprises of the ego, id, and superego. Freud postulated the existence of libido, which is a sexualized energy with which the mental processes and structures are invested and which generates erotic attachments, death drive, and also a source of repetitive compulsion, hate, aggression, and neurotic guilt. Freud's development of the libido was directly linked with the development and the theory of the unconscious. He died on the 23rd September 1939 in Hampstead, London, due to cancer. In the next slide, we are going to talk about the topographical model which was developed by Freud in 1895. This is a topographical model of the human mind. According to this model, there are three levels of consciousness: the conscious mind, the preconscious mind, and the unconscious mind. The conscious mind, as we all know, contains of all the thoughts, memories, feelings, wishes that we are aware of at any given time. This is the aspect of our mind that can process or can think and talk about things rationally and readily. This is the mind that we are always conscious of. The next is the preconscious mind. It consists of all the thoughts, memories, feelings that can be potentially brought into the conscious mind either readily or with some difficulty. They have the potential to become conscious at any moment. The third is the unconscious mind, which is the main source of all of Freud's theories. The unconscious mind is a reservoir of feelings, thoughts, urges, and memories which are outside our conscious awareness. It is a seat of the urges, instincts, words, motives, actions which are unacceptable and unpleasant, and it also contains the feelings of pain, anxiety, conflict, and pleasure. Freud believed that the unconscious mind is largely inaccessible. However, sometimes the unconscious mind creeps into our conscious mind in the form of parapraxis, such as jokes or slip of tongue. In this slide, we are going to talk about parapraxis. Parapraxis are the ways in which the unconscious mind makes itself visible or known to the conscious mind. This usually occurs in two ways. Jokes, mainly referring to double meaning jokes that we crack. It has a surface meaning and an underlying meaning which often expresses our unconscious wishes, desires, and thoughts. The second is the Freudian slip, which is a sudden error or the slip of tongue. For example, a man accidentally uses the former girlfriend's name instead of referring to the current girlfriend. While most of us might think that this is a simple error, Freud believed that this slip of tongue showed a sudden intrusion of the unconscious mind into the conscious mind and is often due to unresolved or repressed feelings regarding the former girlfriend, which is why the man, in order to address his present girlfriend, by mistake uses the name of his former girlfriend. In the next slide, Freud compares the human mind to an iceberg. The topmost level, the tip of the iceberg, which is visible, which lies above the water level, is the conscious mind. The one that is below the water level but is visible to us, the part of the iceberg that is still below the water level but is visible to us, is the preconscious mind. and the large part of the iceberg which lies beneath the water and is not visible to us is the unconscious mind. Through this diagram, he tries to convey the idea that the large bulk of the human mind is basically filled with unconscious motives, fears, wishes, and desires. Now we move on to the structural model. In the structural model, which he developed in 1923, he talks about three basic structures of one's personality: the id, ego, and the superego. In the following slides, we are going to consider each of these terms in details. The id is the primitive and instinctive component of the personality. It contains all the unconscious urges, impulses, and including what is called the libido. The id is also stubborn, and it only responds to what Freud calls the pleasure principle. That is, if it feels good, do it. It only concentrates on the feeling of pleasure. That is why it operates on the pleasure principle. It has no consideration for the external reality. The second structure is the ego. The ego develops to mediate between the unrealistic id and the external world. That is, it is the decision-making component of our personality, and the ego works by reason. The ego considers the social realities and norms, etiquettes and rules in deciding how to behave. It works on the reality principle. It tries to fulfill the desires of the id in a socially acceptable way. The third structure is the superego. The superego mainly consists of all the values and morals which we have learned from the society, from our parents, and from our elders. It is also unconscious, and it is the source of self-criticism and conscience. The superego can be divided into two parts. First is the conscience. Conscience is the voice of morals in our mind. It often tells us what is right and what is wrong. And second is the ego ideal. That is, it is an imaginary picture of ourselves, of how we want to be. It represents our aspirations, the way we want to treat people, and the way we can become a perfect member of the society. This ideal of the self that we want to achieve is known as the ego ideal, and these are the two structures two structures that comprises the superego. Now we are going to refer to the conflicts that arise in our mental life when all three of these structures are in a tussle with one another. When the ego is in conflict with id, it results in neurotic anxiety. When the ego is in conflict with the external reality, it results in the realistic anxiety. And when the ego is in conflict with the superego, it results in moral anxiety. Now we are going to discuss something known as the defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are psychological strategies that are unconscious, and it is often used to protect a person from extreme anxiety arising from unacceptable thoughts or feelings. There are various kinds of defense mechanisms that Freud has postulated. We are going to discuss each one in detail in the following slides. Namely, these defense mechanisms are repression, regression, displacement, sublimation, reaction formation, projection, rationalization, and denial. Denial is basically when we refuse to perceive an incident or a situation because it is too difficult for us to handle. For example, a man refuses to admit that he's an alcoholic and needs to go to a rehab, even though he's not able to spend a single day without drinking excessively. Second is displacement. Displacement is the redirection of impulses onto a powerless substitute target. It is a very basic example that takes place. That is, when we come back home from a bad day at work, we are often irritable and we misbehave with our parents or our children. That is, a woman who is excessively angry at her boss and couldn't say her anything comes back home and scolds the children unnecessarily. So the anger that she harbored towards her boss was directed onto the children. The third is projection. Projection involves the tendency to see our own unacceptable desires in other people. For example, if you hate a group of people, but your superego tells you that this is not the right thing to do, then your defense is you go on to believe that it is those group of people that hate you rather than you hating them. So you're projecting your unacceptable desires onto those group of people. The fourth is rationalization. Rationalization is when often people try to explain their undesirable behaviors with their own set of facts. That is, this allows them to feel comfortable with the choice that they have made, even though on some level they know that they have done wrong. For example, if a girl has failed in history because she did not attend her classes and did not study, but instead of accepting that, she goes on to tell her friends that she failed in the subject because the professor was partial and did not like her, which is why he gave her less marks. Reaction formation. Reaction formation is when you recognize what you feel, but you choose to behave in a completely different way or in the completely opposite manner. For example, Neha is angry with her co-worker for partying late and coming to work late the next day. However, she's nice to her, she's understanding to her for being late, and she also affirms that partying on a weekday is cool. So even though she's angry on her for partying on a weekday and coming to work late, she doesn't express that, and what she expresses is the exact opposite of what she feels. Regression. Regression is when your ego goes back to an earlier stage of development in response to stressful situations. For example, if a person has failed in his graduate examinations, he spends most of his day in bed thinking of his childhood memories or playing with a childhood toy. This kind of reaction, this kind of response is basically done to evade the anxiety that the person is facing at the moment, and he or she has gone back to an earlier stage of development when he was a child. Repression is basically suppression. You tend to suppress the painful memories, the trauma, the sadness that you have experienced in a particular situation or in terms of a particular event or a person. For example, Lena is very close to her grandfather, but she cannot recall her grandfather's fatal heart attack, even though she was the first one to see him suffering in that moment. That is because the moment of seeing her grandfather suffering was so traumatic, so painful to her that she decided to suppress the memory. All of these works on an unconscious level. The last of the defense mechanisms, which is one of the most mature forms of defense mechanisms, is sublimation. That is, we manage to displace our unacceptable emotions or thoughts into behavior that are constructive and socially acceptable, rather than in destructive activities. For example, a man who has lost his own son in a drunk driving accident, instead of seeking revenge on the driver who ran down his own son, he decides to set up a community support group for people who also, like him, has lost their loved ones to drunk driving. According to Freud, the emotions that lie in the unconscious is never really suppressed. It creeps up into the conscious mind, either this way or that way. And it will always have an influence on our conscious activities. While most of Freud's idea has fallen out of favor, the importance of the unconscious has become one of his most important contributions to the field of psychology. Nowadays, psychoanalytic therapy explores how the unconscious mind influences the behavior and thoughts of our conscious life, and it is an important tool in the treatment of mental illness and psychological distress. Where id was, ego shall be, or where id is, there shall be ego, as quoted by Freud, believes that if we attain a full control over our unconscious thoughts, if we make our unconscious thoughts conscious, if we are aware of the unconscious contents of our mind, we would attain or achieve a more evolved, integrated, and a truer sense of self. That is, we will become true to ourselves and we will attain better self knowledge if we are aware of our unconscious motives. Thank you so much.